The package arrived on the first cold morning of October, swaddled in oil-stained linen and bound with gut cord like an ancient wound stitched shut. Elias Hart, the most respected luthier in the city of Otterstein, touched the case and felt a tremor in the wood, as if it still remembered something terrible. He slipped the cord, folded back the cloth, and stared at a violin that did not shine so much as glower. Its varnish was the color of old blood, its belly splayed by a crack that ran from the treble side F-hole to the lower bout. A faint odor of cedar and iron rose from it. The accompanying letter bore no crest, only the flowing hand of a patron who paid for silence as much as for skill. Herr Hart, please restore the enclosed instrument to concert condition. Spare no expense. I will collect it in 3 weeks. Under no circumstances allow it to be played by anyone but yourself. When you are done, burn this letter. Pale K. Elias had repaired 16th-century amities, mended strads whose timbers were thin as eggshells, but none had unsettled him like this. Still, work was work. He swept the shavings off his bench, lit the small stove in the corner of the shop, and set to cataloging the damage. As he peered through an inspection mirror, he saw carvings on the interior linings, tiny sigils cut with exquisite precision, an alphabet he did not recognize. The sound post lay loose, yet the bass bar was intact. Whoever had built the violin had revered resonance but served stranger gods. The nights grew longer while Elias mended purfling and matched spruce grain. He liked to work after the city fell asleep, when only the river spoke. One midnight, shaping a new bridge, he heard, though no bow touched the strings, a single note breathed from the instrument. It hovered like steam, sweet but anguished, and something inside him tightened. He remembered with sudden clarity, standing at his wife's sickbed 10 years before, as the physician shook his head. The memory pricked him, drew one silent tear, and then withdrew, leaving his chest hollow. He shook off the dizziness, blaming fatigue. But curiosity overrode caution. On the 5th night, Elias set the repaired soundpost, strung the violin with fresh gut, and tuned it tentatively. The moment the A wound true, he felt a tug behind his breastbone, like a hand pulling him forward. He raised the bow. Bach's Chaconne had been his test piece since apprenticeship. Its architecture revealed every secret of an instrument. The first measures surged out full and dark, silk-lined with thunder. He played on, breath caught. Each phrase dredged some forgotten ache, his father's proud silence, a friend lost in war. He felt the emotions drain through the fingertips that stopped the strings, spilling into the wood. By the time he reached the final cadence, his heart was a scraped bowl. He lowered the violin. The room looked the same, yet remote, as though placed behind glass. Gratitude, regret, grief, words he still knew but could no longer feel. The numbness frightened him, but alongside it came a curious calm, an impulse to obey whatever command might follow. None did. After several minutes, the sensations crept back like blood into a sleeping limb, prickling, painful. When warmth returned fully, terror followed. He sealed the violin inside its case and pressed his palm to his racing heart. The next morning, he visited the university library, seeking lore instead of lutherie. Old catalogs traced the violin's form to a Bohemian maker, Jan Marek, active in the 1740s Effer. Marek had been praised for instruments of unparalleled fervor, then denounced by clergy who claimed his concerts left congregations anemic of spirit and pliant to suggestion. Rumor said Marek perished when fire consumed his workshop, which his surviving violin vanished. Elias left the library with frost filming his lungs. Was this that very instrument, adrift for centuries? If so, why revive it now? He considered writing to the patron, refusing the commission, but the letter had offered no address. And despite fear, Elias felt the seduction of mastery. Restoring a piece of history, even dark history, was what he lived for. He pressed on, French polishing the varnish until it looked poured from garnet. 2 evenings before the deadline, the shop bell chimed. A woman in a charcoal coat entered, boots clicking like a metronome. She was in her early 40s, hair pinned in a severe knot, eyes the shade of tarnished pewter. "Mr. Hart," she said without introduction. "I am Lyra Kale. I trust the violin is ready?" Elias glanced at the case on the counter. Nearly. I require a final adjustment. Midnight tomorrow, she said. I will host a private recital in the winter salon of the Hofgarten Hotel. You will attend, demonstrate the instrument, and then hand it over. The command brooked no debate. She laid an envelope on the counter, advance payment he presumed, and left before he opened his mouth. That night Elias visited his old friend Matteo, once a fine cellist, now an anatomy lecturer. Elias recounted the violin's effect. Matteo, skeptical, insisted on hearing it. No, Elias protested. I won't be responsible for whatever it does. Then play for me, Matteo urged. I'll observe. Reluctantly, Elias agreed. They sat in Matteo's study among skeleton models and dusty scores. Elias played a simple folk melody. Matteo's shoulders drooped, color drained from his cheeks. When Elias stopped, Matteo stared ahead as if watching snow fall against black glass. Matteo, Elias shook him. The cellist blinked, confusion clouding his features. I feel cold, he whispered. It took half an hour and strong coffee before Matteo revived. You're right, he said hoarsely. That thing drinks feeling. While you played, I'd have signed away my soul. Elias exhaled. Cale wants a recital. I think she means to use the violin on the guests. Then break it, Matteo said. The wood is ancient. A hammer would shatter it, and yet the presence might survive. I need it to die from the inside. Matteo's anatomical gaze shifted to the violin lying in its case like a venomous animal. In living tissue, overstimulation can cause catastrophic failure, he mused. Make it vibrate beyond endurance. Elias's mind raced. Gut strings could be driven to extreme tension if he tuned them a whole step high. Selected a piece of relentless triple stops, the violin would resonate until its plates rocked apart. But he would need a sacrificial string, something that would cut deeper, anchor the instrument's appetite to one final harvest. He thought of the small knife in his tool roll and of the way wood absorbed oil from the craftsman's hands. What of blood? Wasn't a violin's top called the belly? Back in his shop, he unwound the E-string, nicked the pad of his thumb, and let a few drops fall onto the twisted gut before rewinding it. The string took on a dark sheen. Whether the gesture was symbolic or truly bound the instrument to him, he could not know. Symbolism was how power often cloaked itself in the real world. On the appointed night, the winter salon glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. Elias arrived wearing his one good suit. Cale greeted him with a curt nod, ushering him to an elevated dais. Seated below were 30 guests, bankers, city officials, military officers, the cardinal of the regional diocese. Soft melodies of wealth scented the air. Cognac, rosewater, anticipation. Elias tuned briskly, the strings groaning under heightened pitch. He felt the violin's hunger strain against its ribs, eager. Cale stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice smooth as lacquer. Tonight, you will hear an instrument once lost to history, now reborn through the artistry of Herr Hart. Music is the purest vehicle of influence, would you not agree? She smiled. Let us partake. She nodded to Elias. He lifted the violin, bow poised. The guest leaned forward. He began, not with Bach, but with Paganini's La Campanella, a piece of deviltry and fireworks. The ringing harmonics forced the violin into extremes of vibration. Notes flashed like sparks. Each burst stripped a layer of color from the listeners' faces. Eyes dulled, backs slackened. Still Elias drove faster, ricocheting up the fingerboard. He felt the numbness graze him too, but he had tied himself to the task with blood and resolve. The violin quivered. A seam near the bass bar yawned. Cale watched, lips parted in triumph. She did not notice the fissure creeping across the table until a loud crack shot through the hall. Gasps fluttered, then stilled. Nothing stirred in the audience. They had become mannequins awaiting orders. Elias shifted into a brutal triple-stop passage, pressure mounting under the bridge. The spruce belly buckled, and a pitch like tearing silk seared the air. A shard of wood flicked past his cheek. He bore down once more, On the final arpeggio, he snapped the blood-anointed E-string with a whip-like report. Sound exploded outward, a roar, followed by an aching silence. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the violin collapsed in his hands. Top plates split. Soundpost punched through, scroll dangling by splinters. The lacquer seemed to sigh, releasing a vapor that smelled of wet earth and funerals. The lacquer seemed to sigh, releasing a vapor that smelled of wet earth and funerals. A tremolo of cries rose from the audience. Panic, outrage, shame, as if every swallowed emotion had been regurgitated at once. Some clutched their chests, others wept or shouted. Life returned, painful and raw. Kale staggered toward the dais. "What have you done?" she hissed. "Set them free," Elias replied. She reached into her coat, perhaps for a weapon, perhaps for something worse. Before she could draw, Mateo, who had slipped in among the staff, seized her wrist. Security converged. In the chaos, Elias gathered the pieces of the violin into the linen he had once unwrapped. Outside, dawn stirred behind the cathedral spires. Police sirens dopplered toward the hotel, summoned by hysterical guests. Elias walked to the riverbank where willows trailed their fingers in black water. He knelt, struck a match and set the linen bundle alight. The wood hissed. Flames licked varnish, flared green then blue. When only coals remained, he pushed them into the river with a stick. They sizzled and sank. For weeks afterward, Elias's right ear rang. Certain high frequencies never returned. But the city resumed its rhythm, and no newspaper could explain what had transpired in the winter salon. Guests spoke of fainting bouts, mass hallucination. Kale vanished, rumor placed her on a ship bound for South America. The authorities shrugged. Money, they assumed, had smothered scandal. One Sunday, Mateo visited Elias's shop. "No more hauntings?" he asked. "Not in the waking world," Elias said. "When I sleep, I hear it, sometimes, just a whispered just sharp." He smiled without mirth. But splinters are only splinter. They shared coffee. Birds sang outside, oblivious. That spring, Elias traveled to the high forest where tonewood trees grew. He packed a spade instead of chisels. At the clearing's center, he dug a narrow trench and buried the remaining shards, whatever the fire and river had spared, in dark soil. Over them, he planted 2 young spruce saplings, siblings, destined, perhaps, to become instruments of gentler music. Before he left, he pressed an ear to one sapling's slender trunk. Wind coursed through the needles, sounding for the briefest moment, like the hush between notes. Elias straightened, exhaled, and walked back toward the path where the river's distant murmur carried, still and ordinary, on the morning air.